I'd lived in Crestwood Heights for just over 3 weeks when the letter came. A pristine, gold-embossed envelope wedged in my front door. No postage, no sender name, just a wax seal with a smug HHA imprint. Crestwood Heights, Homeowners Association. I had been warned about HOAs before, mostly by friends and neighbors in passing, but this was my first time owning a home in a community with one, or more accurately, beside one. My property was technically not part of the HOA jurisdiction. It was a legal anomaly dating back to a surveying error from the 1980s. My 1-acre estate lay just outside their map territory, but nestled in enough to offend their illusions of control. The letter read like a summons from a medieval king. I was cordially invited to join the CHHA and attend their upcoming mandatory meeting at the community clubhouse. The phrasing was stiff, overly formal, and reeked of condescension. I tossed it in the trash. I had no intention of joining any group that called itself mandatory and operated like a cult with newsletters and yard flags. I was a federal judge, for God's sake. I'd presided over high-profile cartel cases, sentenced organized crime bosses, and even handled 2 classified hearings for the Department of Homeland Security. I wasn't about to be pushed around by lawn sign tyrants, but they didn't know that. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up to a knock on the door. A man in a tight polo shirt and khakis stood there with an all-too-eager smile. "Morning, neighbor," he chirped. "Name's Trevor Bishop, president of the CHHA. Thought I'd stop by and welcome you personally." I didn't return the smile. "That's kind of you, Trevor, but I already received your letter. I'm not interested." Trevor's smile twitched. "Oh, I understand. But just so you know, participation in the HOA is expected. We maintain the values, security, and aesthetic standards of Crestwood. It's a community, after all." I leaned against the doorframe. "My property isn't under your jurisdiction. I've read your charter." That knocked the grin off his face for a beat. "You read it?" "Cover to cover," I said. "Impressive fiction." Trevor's eyes darkened just a little. "Well, then maybe we'll just have to revisit the bylaws. Things evolve. Communities grow. You wouldn't want to be seen as uncooperative." I nodded. "Thanks for the visit, Trevor. Have a good day." I shut the door on his plastic smile. That should have been the end of it. But in Crestwood Heights, no wasn't a word they accepted. The first sign that something was off came that weekend. Saturday morning, I stepped out with my coffee to find my mailbox open, its door hanging like a slack jaw. Inside, instead of letters, there was a folded flyer on glossy cardstock, a bright red HOA banner stretched across the top with the words, "Community Non-Compliance, Know the Signs." And below that, a cartoon drawing of a house with untrimmed hedges, a non-standard fence, and, most pointedly, a black SUV in the driveway. My black SUV. At the bottom, it read, "Report violations to your CHHA patrol team. Together, we keep Crestwood clean." I crushed the flyer in my fist. It wasn't a message, it was a warning. Over the next few days, more things happened. My trash bins were mysteriously dragged into the street, left open and overturned. A friendly neighbor who had waved to me just last week now refused to make eye contact as she jogged past. Someone even sprayed a passive-aggressive, "Not O approved," in chalk on my sidewalk. I could have fought back immediately, called in some favors, leveraged my federal badge, scared them into retreat. But no, that wasn't justice. That was emotion. And emotion wasn't what made me feared in the courtroom. Patience was. Strategy was. Still, I knew it was time to lay groundwork. I began documenting every interaction, every incident, photos, videos, timestamps. I placed a few discreet trail cams around my yard. I even started wearing my old body cam from my DOJ security detail days when I went on walks around the neighborhood. I wasn't just building a case, I was baiting a trap. Then came the second letter. This one arrived in a thick white envelope, taped to my garage door. Inside was a formal notice of violation, written as if I were already part of the HOA. It cited a non-conforming paint color on my shutters, unauthorized exterior lighting, and refusal to attend mandatory meetings. At the bottom, it threatened escalating enforcement measures, including sanctions. Sanctions. They used that word like they had any legal weight, like they thought they could scare me into submission with empty declarations. I laughed out loud, but deep inside, something else churned, a kind of cold recognition. They weren't going to stop. They were going to escalate. And if they wanted to play dirty, fine. They hadn't even begun to see dirty. The fire started at 2:42 a.m. I was out of town, testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee in D.C., a private session on judicial security. My assistant called me at the hotel, voice trembling. "Judge, your house. It's gone. The fire department's here. They're saying it's a total loss." I froze. Gone? Not damaged. Not partially burned. Gone. I flew back the next morning, arriving to find nothing but charred timber, melted metal, and smoke-stained ash where my home used to be. The scent of gasoline still clung to the dirt. Even through the cordon tape, it was unmistakable. Arson. And someone had made sure there was nothing left. The fire marshal's report was swift. Too swift. Likely electrical, it read. No signs of forced entry. Case closed unless further evidence emerges. I felt the lie before I even finished reading. My cameras, gone. My backup drives, melted. The off-site cloud backups I had automatically scheduled, deleted remotely the night before the fire. Someone had accessed my accounts and wiped it all. This wasn't an accident. This was war. 2 days later, I received a condolence card. Yes, a condolence card. Slipped under my car's windshield, unsigned, sealed with the same CHHA wax crest as before. Inside, it read, "A fresh start can be a blessing. Maybe now you'll reconsider joining us." I stood there, in a rented sedan in front of the ruins of my home, staring at the words that confirmed everything I'd feared. The HOA had escalated from passive-aggressive to outright criminal. They'd burned down my home, for refusing to sign their little charter, for standing alone. But now they had made the gravest mistake of all. They had mistaken my silence for weakness, my patience for fear. They had no idea who I truly was. By the next morning, I had secured a new rental in town, small, quiet, and off-grid. I called in 2 of my closest federal colleagues, one from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, the other from the U.S. Marshals Special Ops Group. Within 24 hours, I had opened an off-the-books federal investigation. No one in the HOA knew. No one even suspected. But the net had started to tighten. And when it closed, every smug smile, every fake letter, every staged enforcement action would become Exhibit A in the trial of the century. Because I wasn't just another angry homeowner. I was the Honorable Judge Matthew Kane, Federal Circuit Judge, National Security Clearance, Level 6, and I had just been lit on fire. The first step in dismantling an enemy is understanding their structure. That's something every courtroom battle had taught me. Don't go after the symptoms. Cut the root. Crestwood Heights. Homeowners Association operated like a mafia in pastel polos. But even criminal empires make paper trails, bank accounts, emails, committees, chains of command. I started with Trevor Bishop, Mr. President of the HOA. Thanks to a few friends at the Bureau, I learned Trevor's financials were unusually active for a man claiming to be a retired insurance executive. Over the last 2 years, nearly $300,000 had moved through a shell LLC called Bishop Property Maintenance, registered out of a P.O. box. Cross-referencing it with community invoices, we found that the HOA had been quietly funneling funds for fake landscaping work and security services. Classic fraud, but that was just the surface. We dug deeper. Interviews with disgruntled former board members, leaked HOA meeting recordings, anonymous statements from homeowners too scared to speak publicly. And the picture came into focus fast. Trevor ran the HOA like a personal fiefdom. People who refused to pay extra assessments found their fences reported, their mailboxes smashed, their utilities mysteriously delayed. He even had a network of compliance patrol volunteers, mostly bitter retirees on power trips, who stalked the neighborhood at night. And then there was the clubhouse. Built 5 years ago with emergency funds, the 2-story colonial monstrosity at the end of Maple Lane was more than just a meeting place. According to one of my sources, the HOA had converted the basement into a surveillance hub, security monitors, Wi-Fi sniffers, even a license plate reader trained at every exit. It was illegal, every bit of it. And now, thanks to me, every bit of it was documented. But I didn't want to just expose them. I wanted them cornered, publicly, legally, and without room to wriggle. So I called in the big play. I filed a civil lawsuit. On the surface, it looked like a boring local dispute. Kane vs. Crestwood Heights, Homeowners Association, over property damage and intimidation. But that was the hook. Because once I filed, I could subpoena everything. Emails, security logs, meeting notes, financials, even cell phone pings. The HOA board scrambled. They had no idea they were walking into a federal-grade ambush, and I wasn't finished yet. The night before the first hearing, I walked into the HOA clubhouse uninvited. Trevor and his cronies were holding one of their monthly closed-door sessions. "You can't be here," Trevor barked, rising from his leather seat like a startled cat. "I can," I said calmly, holding up a court order. "As of this morning, this building and its contents are under subpoena. I suggest you don't touch a thing." "You think you're scaring us with paper?" Trevor snapped, face flushing. "No," I replied, "but I thought I'd let you know. Before the marshals arrive in the morning, I'm giving you tonight to decide if you want to fight me in court or in prison." I turned and walked out as the room fell into dead silence. The next morning, half the HOA board resigned. But it was already too late. The fire had been lit. And this time, I held the match. The courthouse was buzzing before the hearing even began. Word had spread fast that a federal judge was suing a homeowners association. Reporters lined the steps and local news vans blocked half the street. They didn't know the full scope yet, just whispers about arson, corruption, and fraud, but they could smell blood in the water. Inside, the courtroom was packed. The HOA had brought their attorney, a smug suburban lawyer named Kurt Lemley, who had clearly underestimated what he'd walked into. He smirked as he shuffled papers and whispered to Trevor, who sat pale and tight-lipped at the defense table. When the judge entered, the gallery fell silent. Not me, of course. I couldn't preside over my own case. Instead, it was Judge Hannah Rice, a longtime colleague and one of the sharpest minds on the circuit. She'd agreed to expedite the preliminary hearings once she saw the evidence I'd already compiled. Court is now in session for Kane versus Crestwood Heights Homeowners Association, the clerk announced. Lemley stood. Your Honor, we motion to dismiss. This case is a personal vendetta, filed by a disgruntled homeowner who is not even a member of our association. I didn't rise. I just slid a binder across the plaintiff's table. Your Honor, I said calmly, I have here evidence of fraudulent billing practices, harassment of non-members, and illegal surveillance systems installed in a residential community without consent, including photographic proof of a basement server rack that pulls MAC addresses and Wi-Fi data from every nearby device. Judge Rice's eyebrows lifted. I continued. Additionally, I have sworn affidavits from 2 HOA board members who resigned after learning that association funds were being used for retaliatory property damage, including, but not limited to, setting fire to my residence. You could hear the gasps ripple through the courtroom. Lemley's smirk evaporated. Judge Rice turned to him. Counselor, how does your client respond to these allegations? Trevor opened his mouth, but no words came out. Lemley fumbled. We'll need time to review. This is highly irregular. Irregular? I said, standing now. What's irregular is a homeowner's private property being surveilled, vandalized, and ultimately burned to the ground over a refusal to submit to an illegitimate HOA. What's irregular is a group of suburban bullies acting like a paramilitary club, funded by fake invoices and fear. Judge Rice looked over her glasses. Motion to dismiss denied. Discovery will proceed immediately, and I'm referring the matter to the district attorney's office. Trevor visibly gulped. Lemley sat down without a word. The room erupted once court was adjourned. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. But I didn't stop for them. I walked straight to the lobby, phone in hand, and dialed the one number I had saved for emergencies like this. Director Monroe? Yeah, it's Judge Kane. We're greenlit. Pull the trigger. Operation Ivy Gate was underway. That's what the Bureau dubbed the Joint Task Force now targeting Crestwood Heights HOA. Over the next 48 hours, federal agents fanned out quietly across the neighborhood. Subpoenas hit the county clerk's office, the HOA's shady bookkeeping firm, and Trevor Bishop's bank accounts. By the end of the week, 7 board members and their contractors were under full surveillance. And then the arrests began. It started with Kevin Mertz, the so-called compliance captain who moonlighted as a local security contractor. His phone was tapped. Hours of voice recordings showed him bragging about torching that judge's house and how Trevor covered it through our landscaping receipts. He was arrested at dawn. The feds confiscated his truck, guns, and a safe full of HOA documents stashed in his garage. Next came Lydia Rayburn, HOA treasurer. Turns out Lydia had kept a second set of books. In her closet, inside a hollowed-out copy of Better Homes and Gardens. Handwritten notes, payments, even a receipt for the purchase of gasoline dated the night before my house burned. By the time Trevor Bishop was taken into custody, he looked like a man who hadn't slept in weeks. He was escorted from the HOA clubhouse in cuffs, past stunned neighbors and a dozen media cameras. The footage was on every channel by noon. Breaking. Crestwood HOA president arrested in alleged arson fraud case. Federal judge's lawsuit exposes HOA corruption ring. Suburban Mafia, FBI takedown in Crestwood. The fallout was swift and brutal. Homeowners, those once too afraid to speak, now lined up to testify. Stories poured out. Broken windows, canceled permits, pets poisoned. A playground quietly shut down because Trevor didn't like the noise. In court, we presented the evidence methodically. The surveillance logs, the money trails, the HOA's secret surveillance cameras aimed at my house. The jury sat frozen, stunned by the arrogance of it all. I didn't need drama. I let the facts do the crushing. And when the trial ended, the verdict was unanimous. Guilty on multiple federal counts: racketeering, fraud, conspiracy to commit arson, and abuse of power under color of authority. Trevor was sentenced to 35 years without parole. Lydia, 22 years. Kevin, 18. Others cut deals. Some turned state's witness. A few were still being investigated by the IRS thanks to the unpaid taxes on their payouts. The HOA itself was dissolved by federal order. The Crestwood Heights neighborhood was placed into administrative receivership, managed temporarily by the county. Every homeowner was offered full financial restitution. Many, for the first time in years, felt safe. As for me, I rebuilt. Not just my house, but my presence. Because fear had once taken something from me, but not anymore. And when the media circus quieted, when the cameras moved on, and the town returned to some sense of normal, I received a letter. A simple handwritten note on legal paper, mailed from a federal prison in Colorado. Trevor Bishop's handwriting was unmistakable. "You should have just joined the HOA, Judge." I smiled, and I wrote back, "You should have read my resume." 6 months after the verdict, the charred land where my old house once stood bloomed again. I rebuilt, not just a home, but a symbol. The new house stood taller, stronger, and more defiant. It was designed by a decorated veteran architect who'd once sued his own HOA. We kept the land's natural curves, built around the remaining trees, and installed solar panels, a private well, and every ounce of modern security I could afford. But the real foundation wasn't steel or concrete, it was principle. This home would never bow to intimidation again. The community changed too. Without the HOA's shadow looming, the people of Crestwood Heights began to come alive. Yards filled with kids again. Flags went up, some patriotic, some rainbow, some simply personal. No one came around with clipboards to say what color your shutters could be. The man down the street who used to be fined for his pickup truck, he now ran for county commissioner and won. The playground reopened. The fence around the community pool was repainted with murals from local students. And at the entrance where the HOA once hung their community guidelines, someone posted a hand-painted sign that read, "Crestwood Heights, a free neighborhood." As for me, I returned to the bench, quietly, without fanfare. Not everyone knew what had happened. The national news cycle had moved on, and I preferred it that way. But for those who did remember, neighbors, friends, colleagues, I became something more than just a judge. I was a warning and a reminder. That power, when abused, always carries a price. Sometimes that price is measured in court dates and restitution. Sometimes in cell blocks and silence. But the people who tried to rule with fear, they forgot one crucial thing. Justice has a long memory. And the law, real law, doesn't wear khakis and write nasty letters. It doesn't burn homes in the night or send fake bills to scare retirees. It waits, it builds, and when the time comes, it crushes. One day I was approached by a publisher, someone who had followed the entire story and wanted to publish the full tale. I declined. Not out of pride, but because I knew the real reward wasn't in telling it. It was in knowing they'd never do it again. Crestwood became a model community, not because it had an HOA, but because it no longer needed one. Respect replaced regulation. Neighbors learned to talk instead of report, and in time, no one missed the board meetings, the citations, or the threats. Years later, when a developer tried to reintroduce an HOA in a neighboring town, someone showed up to the town hall meeting with a printed copy of the court case. They didn't even vote. The proposal was withdrawn on the spot. Sometimes the system works slowly. Sometimes justice takes a long road. But when it arrives, it's unstoppable, like the flames that once consumed my house. Only this time, they burn the right empire down.